So welcome to this series called the Perioperative Coach. In this series we have top tips on all aspects of perioperative care from some of the world's experts working together to enhance surgical recovery. Don't forget to look on the show notes on topmedtalk.com for additional links to papers, etc. And of course, if you haven't done it already, subscribe to Top Med Talk. Top Med Talk. I'm now going to jump to fluid management. So in the next few minutes, I want to deal with some of the less classical controversies about fluid management. I want to concentrate on some of the things that turned out to be highly controversial in developing the consensus and seem to be some of the hardest to implement. That's the, nil by mouth. That's the letting patients have a clear fluid, whatever that means. That's the carbohydrate drink. That's the maintenance fluid, the third space, getting the IV down. So I'm joined by Dr. Scott Brudney, who's another anaesthetist, critical care physician. He's got an interesting history. He's ex-UK, ex-USA, now in Canada, in Winnipeg. Scott, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
I'm very well, Monty. Thank you for inviting me.
So I understand, Scott, you've got some new jobs. What have you got to tell us about? Are you running the healthcare system in Canada?
I am the Chief Medical Officer and Chief of Clinical Programs for one of the tertiary care hospitals in the city, and that's at St. Boniface. Yet still undertaking anaesthesia and critical care as well.
So you're going to be shaking things up as the new CMO. So how, is it, in the UK, the it's okay to have a drink before surgery message, which has been there since the last decade, was the hardest thing to implement. Everyone knew that you had to be starved after midnight, and I mean everybody. So it turned out to be the most difficult needle to shift. What was it like in the USA, and what's it like now in Canada?
So I think in the USA, it seemed to be an easier change to implement. We're all familiar with the pre-op assessment units that patients come to pre-op and are given information. But I think the dissemination of nil per mouth or NPO to the staff receiving patients was certainly well undertaken in the US. And I hate to say it, but having arrived here in Manitoba, although the message is still the same, which is that patients can have fluids up to 2 hours before an operation, the implementation of that has not been very straightforward. And I would say that is, as you have highlighted, one of our hardest points to change.
And the carbohydrate drink, because we tried to write to people to say it's all right to have a proprietary drink preoperatively, and the compliance rate was terrible, and some people even wrote angry letters back to us to say that we were pushing well-known proprietary products and we were bonkers. Any views on that?
So I have a slightly different view in that I am very keen on people actually drinking, and so if I mandate that they take a complex carbohydrate drink, especially if they have to pay for it, rather than take water, the message has often been confused. So we've ended up with people saying, I didn't want to take that drink, so I didn't have anything. So then they come in starved and not having had a drink, which I think is infinitely worse than actually taking water or just straight clear fluids rather than the complex carbohydrate drink. And we obviously haven't got time in this format to delve into the clinical trials that support one or the other. But I think everyone understands that having a patient not dehydrated before surgery is certainly our key focus. And then if we can get to the next step, which would then be adding in complex carbohydrates, that would be icing on that cake. But we are still getting patients in who have said that they've had nothing since 6 o'clock the night before. These are often elderly patients, and it just makes for the intra-op being that much more difficult to manage, as you know.
So, and when we come to so-called maintenance fluid, now when we were children, our textbooks said that we should give people 20 mils per kilo per hour of salty solution because someone had put a knife in their belly. And if we look at the randomized controlled trials now, some of them are still, they're not doing 20, but they're doing 10 mils per kilo per hour of salt-rich solutions, whereas others are giving 1 mil per kilo per hour of a sugary solution. What have you got a handle on the maintenance in your current environment, and compare that to the USA?
So I think certainly in the US we once again were pretty switched on as to whether to have maintenance in that pre-op area for complex patients, perioperatively, and then what we did post-operatively. All changed along with the guidelines, not quickly, but certainly over time. And so I think what happened in Canada is that we are slowly getting to tackle the anaesthetists and what they do with the enhanced recovery patients, and even the non-enhanced recovery patients. So pushing providers to put maintenance or routine fluids onto an IV that's administered. For us, I would say at a mil per kilo or a mil and a half is fine. And then giving fluids as required. And then for those fluids, how do we know that they're required? Actually measuring that measurement. And that in Canada has certainly been a battle, because anything that costs money to obtain is often frowned upon. So not very straightforward, but we are slowly changing. But there seems to be an engaged workforce that are adaptable to change.
Again, you're saying getting it on a pump seems to be the way of getting a grip on the maintenance fluid.
Right.
What about getting that IV down? Because we found that if we leave IVs running, then people get death by saline, not literally, but damage by saline in the middle of the night, drowning, pickling. And if we can get it stopped in the recovery area, that makes a big difference. But how are you doing with that?
I think that makes an enormous difference. Yeah, I think the ability to have somebody, and this is part of our pre-op counselling, is that you are expected to drink in recovery, and once patients do that, then the IV is capped, and there's been a lot of education of junior staff not to chase oliguria, and then, just because they're phoned at night time, give 250, 500 of fluid. So trying to change the mindset of the trainees and in-house doctors, not to chase oliguria. And then just be fairly acutely aware of anuria. So, not to be complacent about people not peeing at all. But obviously, if they're not peeing that much, then we're not going to be too excited about it. And we're certainly not going to jump in and, fill them with crystal oil.
Nick Majerison here. On August the 11th, 12th and 13th, the American Association of Nurse Anaesthetists will be holding their annual Congress. Top Med Talk will be coming to you with live updates from the meeting as it happens. We'll be interviewing thought leaders, academics and prominent practitioners for 3 days of discussion and debate. The opioid crisis, enhanced recovery, innovations in anaesthesia and much, much more. Guests will include the president of the AA&A, Gary Bridges, Lynn Reed and Lorraine Jordan, to name but a few. To get ahead of the curve, why not listen to some of last year's podcasts from the AA&A? Simply go to topmedtalk.com and type into the search engine AA&A. Pop that in and you will find our output from last year. In the meantime, of course, if you want to find out more, the American Association of Nurse Anaesthetists are holding their annual Congress August the 11th through till the 13th. Go to topmedtalk.com for more details, and while you're there, make sure you subscribe to Top Med Talk, and of course, you've joined us on social media. That's topmedtalk.com.